Wait, what do you mean I'm being let go? I hadn't even finished my coffee. 1 hour earlier, I'd stood in front of the executive team, closing a $1.7 million deal. After 6 months of negotiations, they clapped, they smiled. Calvin even patted my shoulder and said, "You've made us proud, Arya." Now I was in his office. Same building, different universe. Across from me sat Calvin Morris, my direct supervisor for 5 years. Next to him, lounging with an unearned confidence, was Lucas Eldridge, the 20-something son of our CEO. Calvin stared down at the manila folder in front of him like it might bite. "Your position has been dissolved," he said, not looking up. "It's part of a strategic reallocation. Lucas will be assuming your accounts." My mouth went dry. "You mean the accounts I built from scratch? The ones I managed through 2 market crashes and a global shortage?" Calvin gave a thin smile. "The kind you use when you're trying to skip past a disaster. You've done excellent work. Truly. But the company is evolving." Lucas didn't speak, just sat there with that smirk, like this had been a long-awaited inheritance. I wasn't naive. I knew nepotism when I saw it. But I had thought, stupidly, maybe, that merit still held weight. There were no documents to sign, no exit interview, no warning, just silence. And that folder. I stood slowly, ignoring the heat rising in my chest. I wanted to shout, to rip the blinds off the glass walls and demand answers. Instead, I did what no one expected. I nodded once, turned, and walked out. Not a word, but inside, everything cracked. I packed my things quietly. No farewell speeches, no coworkers stopping by. They probably didn't even know yet. Calvin had made sure this was swift. Painless for him, crippling for me. By 3:20 in the afternoon, I was sitting on the steps outside the building where I'd spent the last 9 years of my life. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there, frozen. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost declined. "Ms. Aria Valamont?" a warm voice asked. "This is Charles Dunley, executor of Elaine Valamont's estate. Your grandmother's will has been triggered. She left you a controlling interest, 38% of VLT Corporation." I blinked. "Come again?" "She wanted it kept silent until you turned 30. You turned 30 last week, yes?" I didn't answer. My hand trembled slightly. "I'd like to schedule a meeting to go over the transition of voting rights and stakeholder access." I hung up and stared at the skyline. They thought they ended me today. They had no idea what they just woke up. I couldn't sleep that night. The call from Charles Dunley kept echoing in my mind like a slow, surreal wave. "Your grandmother left you 38% of VLT Corporation." I replayed it over and over, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by empty tea mugs and the last framed picture I had of her. Elaine Valamont, co-founder, visionary, and the only person in my family who ever believed in me without asking for anything in return. She used to say, "Legacy is a long game, Arya. But if you play it right, you don't need to shout, you just need to outlast." That night, I pulled down the old storage box she left me 2 years ago, sealed with tape, and scribbled with a label in her handwriting. "Open when you've forgotten who you are." I guess now was the time. Inside, photos, handwritten notes, and a small red envelope marked "Confidential, for Arya only." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a copy of the trust, signed, witnessed, and locked in by her personal estate attorney. The legal language was dense, but one line hit like thunder. "Upon Arya Valamont reaching the age of 30, full stakeholder rights and 38% equity ownership of VLT Corporation shall be transferred to her name." 30. I had turned 35 days ago, and no one, not Calvin, not the CEO, not even Lucas, had the faintest idea. I should have been thrilled. But instead, I felt something stranger, unease, because now I had power. And with power comes a storm. I knew that if I moved too soon, they'd find a way to twist it, discredit me, paint me as emotional, vengeful, weak. But if I moved at the right time, I could undo everything they built on deception. The next morning, I met Charles in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the VLT tower. He slid over a folder with legal documents confirming the activation of my voting rights. No press release. No announcement. Your grandmother was very intentional, he said. She believed silence was stronger than noise. I left the cafe with my mind racing. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight yet. I needed to watch. And that's exactly what I did for the next 2 weeks. I monitored every internal VLT update I still had back-end access to: client dashboards, pitch summaries, CRM data. I wasn't supposed to have access anymore, but the IT team hadn't revoked my credentials. Another oversight from Lucas. I didn't expect what I found. Buried in the quarter-end summaries were multiple red flags. 3 long-term clients had downgraded their contracts, one citing lack of experienced liaison, another warning of technical misalignment. Translation: Lucas was tanking accounts I had spent years nurturing. One note from a sales director stood out. Client raised concerns about Lucas's handling of the contract, mentioned Arya by name, requesting escalation. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had dismantled what I built. And worse, Lucas wasn't just handed my role, he was failing at it. And now I had proof. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. They thought I was gone, that I'd disappear quietly. But this isn't over. I folded the printouts, slid them into a plain envelope, and placed them beside the trust papers in my drawer. No rush, no noise. I would wait. And when I spoke again, they'd be forced to listen for 3 weeks. I said nothing, not a single word to anyone who didn't already know what had happened. I didn't reach out to any of the clients I'd left behind. I didn't message old coworkers. I didn't call the few friends who'd remained in the company. I stayed silent, watching, waiting. The first week was the hardest. I couldn't stop replaying my last day in the office. The look in Calvin's eyes when he handed me the termination notice, the arrogant glint in Lucas's gaze when he was told he'd take over my accounts, the way the whole company seemed to just move on without me. But something happened during the second week. I started to notice the cracks. Lucas wasn't doing well. In fact, he was failing spectacularly. It started small, a missed deadline here, a botched presentation there. A critical client dropped their contract after a disastrous meeting with him. I overheard whispers in the hallways, murmurs of frustration from longtime employees who'd never dared speak out before. How did we end up here? They asked each other. Lucas is out of his depth. But what caught my attention most was the meeting on Thursday, the quarterly strategy presentation, the one I used to lead. Calvin didn't even bother showing up, leaving Lucas to stand in front of the board, fumbling through slides that were half finished. I had prepared the data. I had built the projections. But Lucas, he didn't even know how to explain them. The board members weren't subtle about their displeasure. The room felt cold, hostile even, and through it all, Lucas stammered, unable to field the questions, his arrogance giving way to palpable panic. That was when I realized something crucial. The company wasn't just losing because of my absence. It was losing because of Lucas's incompetence. I had built this company, our company. I had led deals that would have secured our future. And now, I was watching it all slip away. For the next few days, I became a silent observer, gathering intel from every corner of the company. I listened to conversations in the cafeteria. I scrolled through internal emails that weren't meant for me to see. And the more I observed, the more I saw how deeply the roots of dysfunction had grown in. Lucas wasn't just a problem for me. He was a problem for everyone. He wasn't just my replacement. He was the company's cancer. I began to see how my silence could work to my advantage. I would watch him unravel, piece by piece, until he could no longer keep up the facade of competence. But I needed help. I needed allies, people in the company who still trusted me, who believed in the work we had done together. I started reaching out, quietly, discreetly, making small talk with people in positions of power, the head of operations, a few key clients who'd stayed loyal. Slowly, I rebuilt the network I had spent years cultivating. I wasn't going to attack head on. Not yet. I was gathering strength, creating a foundation for the strike I knew was coming. The biggest revelation came one afternoon. When I ran into Calvin in the elevator, he was alone, looking unusually tense. The man who had fired me so coldly just weeks ago was now clearly on edge. "Arya," he said, the nervousness in his voice impossible to mask. "Didn't expect to see you around." I gave him a cool smile. "Just finishing up some things." He hesitated. "You're not thinking about coming back, are you?" "No, Calvin, but you might want to start thinking about something." I knew then. Calvin was just as trapped as Lucas. I had suspected it for a while, but now I was sure. He was under immense pressure from the CEO. The results weren't coming in. Lucas wasn't cutting it. The board was starting to get impatient. Calvin was, in his own way, trying to cover up the cracks, trying to hold everything together, while it all fell apart. As I watched him depart the elevator, his shoulders hunched in defeat, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. This was the beginning of the end for both of them. I had power. I had knowledge. And more than anything, I had patience. Soon enough, I would make my move. I didn't go there to be polite. 3 weeks of silence had given me clarity. Watching Lucas stumble through meetings, destroy client relationships, and shrug off accountability like it was beneath him, it had sharpened something inside me, something steel cold. It was time. I scheduled the meeting under the guise of a transition debrief. Calvin accepted the invite with a one-word reply. "Lucas?" He didn't respond at all. Typical. When I walked into the glass conference room on the 15th floor, both men were already seated. Calvin looked tense, lips pursed, his suit slightly wrinkled like he hadn't slept well in days. Lucas, in contrast, was reclined, spinning a company pen between his fingers, grinning like a kid who still thought this was a game. "Arya," Calvin said, standing halfway. "Didn't expect—" I held up a hand. "Let's not waste time." I slid a file across the table. Inside, screenshots, client feedback reports, internal emails, concrete proof of Lucas's failure to manage the accounts he'd inherited. "I gave you 3 weeks," I said evenly. 3 weeks to prove you could handle what you asked for, what you took. And in that time, we've lost over $400,000 in revenue, 2 legacy clients, and half of the department is quietly looking for the exit." Lucas scoffed, flipping open the folder like it was a joke. "So you came here to tattle?" I ignored him. "Calvin?" I turned, my voice calm but clipped. "You knew this would happen. You've worked with me for 5 years. You knew what those accounts needed. And yet you handed the over with 0 onboarding, 0 accountability. And now you're watching the company bleed out." Calvin shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't my decision alone." "No," I cut in. "Then let's talk about who's making decisions. Because if it's Lucas, we're in trouble. And if it's the CEO, then he clearly hasn't been reading the board reports." Lucas stood abruptly. "You don't work here anymore, Arya. You don't get to throw accusations." I looked him in the eye, unblinking. "No, but I do own 38% of this company. And I'm calling for a special shareholders meeting." The room went still. Calvin's expression changed first. His face drained of color. Lucas froze mid-step. "You—" "What?" Calvin whispered. "My grandmother left it to me. It became active the day I turned 30. And since I've had time to watch quietly, I'm using that time now to act, publicly, legally, and effectively." Lucas laughed. but it was hollow. "You're bluffing." I pulled out the notarized trust document, set it gently on the table. "Try me." Calvin looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Lucas stared at the page like it was written in another language. "Listen," Calvin said, voice lower now, almost pleading. "We can figure something out, privately. No need to go nuclear." I leaned forward slightly. "I don't want a deal, Calvin. I want accountability for the damage done, for the betrayal, for the silence." The meeting ended without handshakes, but that wasn't the end of the day. Later that evening, as I sat in a quiet booth at my favorite cafe, sipping black tea and scrolling through emails, one message caught my eye. Subject line, "Private discussion." It was from Margaret Chen, one of the company's most respected legacy shareholders, a woman I'd presented to dozens of times over the years. "Aria, I've heard murmurs of what's been happening. I'd like to talk. Soon." M. I reread it twice. Margaret Chen didn't talk to just anyone, and she never put things in writing unless she meant them. I smiled, just slightly. I didn't win yet, but the tide had turned, and I was far from done. The invitation was simple. A lunch meeting, private room, just me and Margaret Chen. But I knew better. This wasn't lunch. This was a test. Margaret had been with VLT since its founding years, a quiet powerhouse. Her votes carried weight in every board decision. She didn't waste time. She didn't mince words. And she definitely didn't get involved unless something truly threatened the company's foundation. I arrived early. When she walked in, gray silk blouse, hair pinned back like always, she gave me a look that said everything. "Impress me. Or don't bother." I stood and extended a hand. She shook it, brief, firm. "Aria," she said, sitting across from me. "I assume this isn't about reminiscing." "No," I said. "It's about saving the company from its own leadership." She tilted her head slightly. "Strong words." "Accurate ones." I handed her a folder, same one I'd given Calvin, but I'd added 2 new pages. Projections showing the financial damage Lucas had caused in less than a quarter, and a breakdown of client losses, one of them dating back nearly 15 years. Margaret scanned the documents, her expression unreadable. "I won't sugarcoat it," I continued. "I know Lucas isn't the only problem. He's the symptom. The root issue is the leadership vacuum. Calvin's compliance, the CEO's nepotism, and a board that's been kept in the dark for far too long." She finally looked up. "You want to replace them?" "I want to rebuild the leadership structure," I said. "Start with accountability. Lucas steps down from client-facing roles. Calvin is reviewed independently. And I propose an internal oversight team comprised of legacy managers and stakeholder reps to review executive decisions before they're approved." She didn't react, just set the folder down and folded her hands. "And you think the board will accept this from someone who, until recently, wasn't even in the room?" I met her gaze evenly. "I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm offering a choice. The company is bleeding. If we don't stop it now, you'll be looking at fire sales within a year, or worse. Acquisition at half valuation. I've seen the numbers. You have too." A moment passed, then another. Finally, Margaret leaned back and exhaled. "You sound different than you used to." "I am." "You sound like a woman who knows her leverage." "I do." She nodded once. "Then use it wisely." We didn't shake hands again. We didn't need to. Later that evening, I received confirmation that Margaret had called an emergency board advisory session. That wasn't just movement, it was momentum. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not revenge, readiness. But the day wasn't done with surprises. Just after 9, my phone buzzed with a message from a former account executive who still trusted me. "Thought you should know. Lucas greenlit a redesign for the Blackwell contract. Didn't consult engineering. Client pulled the deal today. $6 million gone overnight. $6 million gone." Blackwell was one of our top-tier enterprise clients. I had cultivated that relationship personally. It had taken years to build trust. And Lucas had managed to tear it down in weeks, with a single, reckless decision. My stomach twisted. But only for a second. Then I steadied myself. This wasn't a setback. This was proof. Every careless move Lucas made was another nail in the coffin of the leadership that had betrayed me. And I was documenting all of it. When I closed my laptop that night, I didn't feel defeated. I felt sharper, stronger. I wasn't climbing back in. I was rising above. The board wasn't mine yet, but the ground beneath them was cracking, and I would be ready when it broke. I wasn't looking for it. It started with a file buried in the financial audit system, a flagged report labeled Q3 contract adjustments. I had seen the summary before, but this time I dug deeper. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way Calvin had avoided eye contact during the last meeting. Or maybe it was just the silence. How no one was questioning why money kept vanishing into restructuring. What I found made my stomach turn. A 3-page appendix, masked as a vendor consolidation deal, tucked inside a list of logistics partnerships. The numbers didn't match. A payment of $850,000 had been routed to a shell firm I'd never heard of, Clearline Dynamics. But Clearline didn't provide logistics. It didn't even exist in our approved vendor registry. That's when I knew. This wasn't negligence. It was calculated. Lucas didn't have the intelligence to orchestrate something like this alone. Calvin did. And suddenly, everything made sense. The layoffs, the vague budget cuts, the bleeding contracts. They were draining the company on purpose, likely to shift assets quietly before the board could act. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. For years, I'd trusted Calvin. He was the one who'd encouraged me to take leadership roles, who told me I was irreplaceable. And now, here I was, watching the man I once respected defraud the company we both helped build. It wasn't just betrayal, it was personal. That night, I printed everything: invoices, approval logs, internal email chains. I organized it chronologically, labeled each piece of evidence, and locked the binder in my drawer. I wasn't ready to go public yet, not until I was certain I had the votes, so I started making calls. I met discreetly with 3 other shareholders over coffee and under the radar. I didn't show them everything, just enough to plant doubt, enough to make them listen. And they did. They didn't say much, but they listened. That was the beginning. Then came the call that punched the air from my lungs. Margaret Chen, the one person I thought I had convinced, the one I'd just started to trust. She left me a voicemail, short and sharp. "Aria, I've reconsidered." Calvin approached me with a counter-proposal. He's willing to transition Lucas out over time. Quietly, no public damage. I think it's best for the company if we avoid a war. I sat frozen at my kitchen counter, phone still in my hand. A war? They already started it the day they fired me. I replayed her message 3 times, looking for cracks. There were none. She'd flipped. Calvin had gotten to her first. It was smart, ruthless, and it meant the vote was now on a knife's edge. I had underestimated them. I thought facts would win. But in this game, relationships moved faster than reason. Still, I wasn't backing down. I drafted a formal motion for an emergency shareholder session and submitted it through the proper channels. I CC'd legal. I CC'd compliance. I copied every executive who still had a shred of integrity left. Then I started preparing the presentation. Slide 1, the Clearline transaction. Slide 2, the client losses, mapped to every misstep by Lucas. Slide 3, the trust, my 38%. Slide 4, the consequences of silence. It wasn't just about exposing fraud anymore. It was about reclaiming truth, reclaiming my name, reclaiming the company from the decay they had quietly nurtured. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. I simply moved forward with clarity, precision, and purpose. Because when people show you who they are, you can either let it crush you or you can rebuild yourself with steel in your spine. They chose betrayal. I chose to return stronger. And I wasn't walking into the next meeting alone. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the frost of nervous tension, or maybe it was just me. Steel in my shoulders, focus in my fingertips, a binder under one arm, and a flash drive in the other. Calvin and Lucas were already seated when I entered. Lucas looked smug, like he thought this was all just another bluff. Calvin looked like a man trying to memorize a lie before being asked to repeat it. I took the seat closest to the display screen and opened my laptop without a word. 10 shareholders, 4 executives, legal counsel, HR, 2 empty seats, one for the CEO, who hadn't arrived, and one for me. But I was here. Said Valamont, the chair began. You've requested the floor under stakeholder authority. You may proceed. I stood and connected my drive. My voice was steady. Too steady. Over the past quarter, this company has suffered preventable client losses totaling over $6.4 million, including the full collapse of the Blackwell contract, our longest-standing enterprise client. Click, slide 1. The redacted email chain showing Lucas's unauthorized contract changes. Click, slide 2. The audit trail of the Clearline Dynamics payment, $850,000 to a non-existent logistics provider. Click. Slide 3. My notarized trust documents. 38% equity ownership. Activated on my 30th birthday. Click. Slide 4. Client quotes. Staff exit surveys. Internal warnings ignored. Silence. Then a shuffle of paper. Then a cough. Then nothing. I'm formally requesting a vote of no confidence in Calvin Morris as COO, and a temporary removal of Lucas Eldridge from all client-facing roles, pending external investigation, I said calmly. These actions are necessary to restore trust, prevent legal exposure, and stabilize our client portfolio. Lucas jumped to his feet. This is a personal attack. None of this proves. Sit down. Someone muttered near the end of the table. Calvin tried to speak. This is being misinterpreted. Misinterpreted? I snapped. Would you like me to pull up the transaction logs? Or the anonymous whistleblower complaints? I have both. I looked directly at each board member. This isn't vengeance. It's survival. If we don't act today, we lose everything tomorrow. The chairperson cleared his throat. We'll call the vote. Hands went up, one by one. First Margaret, then 2 more, then 5. Calvin lowered his eyes. The motion passed, 7-3. Lucas sat frozen. His face was a mix of confusion and outrage, like the playground bully finally realizing recess was over, and he wasn't the one calling the bell. I took a breath, not to calm myself, to feel it. Victory. It wasn't loud. It didn't cheer. It didn't dance. It settled, like weight being lifted, like the room had just tilted in my direction. We were preparing to adjourn when my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I stared at it, then answered. Aria, the voice on the other end said. Smooth, commanding, detached. This is Gregory Eldridge, the CEO, Lucas's father. I've been briefed, he continued. Impressive presentation. Damning. Really. You've made quite the move. I did what needed to be done, I replied flatly. I'm sure you believe that, but before this gets messier, I'm offering you a choice. We avoid a public scandal. You drop the investigation. We restructure quietly, and I offer you Calvin's seat as COO. My breath caught. That wasn't a warning. It was a deal, a peace treaty wrapped in velvet, a promotion, and a leash. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it, he said before ending the call. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. Everyone else had left the room. Only the echo of silence remained. They wanted this buried. They wanted me bought. But I wasn't sure they understood who they were dealing with anymore. Not just the woman they fired, but the woman who came back and rewrote the rules. I didn't need the full 24 hours. I knew my answer before Gregory Eldridge even hung up. He thought offering me Calvin's seat would pacify me, contain me, turn me into a pawn in the same game they'd been playing for years. But I wasn't interested in swapping cages. I wanted the keys. The next morning, I submitted a formal resolution to the board, a motion for the immediate review and removal of Gregory Eldridge as CEO under Clause 9B, breach of fiduciary duty and willful neglect of executive oversight. I attached the necessary documents, the Clearline Shell transaction, the internal complaints he ignored, the promotion of an unqualified family member to an executive client role that led to multi-million-dollar losses. All of it. It was bold. Some would say reckless. But I'd spent enough time playing careful. Gregory didn't respond in writing. He didn't need to. Instead, he sent emissaries, lawyers, advisors, even an anonymous PR strategist who tried to convince me that damaging his reputation would harm shareholder trust. I didn't flinch. Every threat he sent only confirmed the truth. He knew I had him. He just didn't believe I'd finished the job. On Friday morning, the board convened in full for the first time in months. No missing seats. No empty coffee cups. Everyone showed up, for the blood or the breakthrough. I stood at the head of the table. No binder this time, no flash drive, just facts and resolve. I was offered a compromise, I began, a high-ranking role, in exchange for silence, in exchange for pretending that the last 3 months didn't happen. Eyes shifted across the table, some ashamed, others intrigued. I declined, because power that comes from silence is just fear in a nicer suit. There were no outbursts this time, no scrambling defenses. Everyone had seen enough. When the vote was called, hands rose slowly, methodically, 7-4. Gregory Eldridge was out. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly, but deep inside. I felt it, a quiet, steady pulse of something I hadn't felt in months, freedom. The board asked if I would consider stepping into the interim CEO position. I said no. I already have someone in mind, I said. Someone who's led teams with integrity, someone clients trust, someone who doesn't carry the weight of the last regime. Then I named her, Natalie Ruiz, the former VP of Client Strategy, the one executive who dared to challenge Lucas months ago. She was pushed aside quietly. But I remembered. There was a brief murmur of surprise, then a growing wave of nods. Natalie was approved unanimously. It should have been the end of it. But as we began to adjourn, one of the oldest shareholders, Joseph Lang, who rarely spoke, stood up, clearing his throat with a tired rasp. "I respect what you've done, Arya," he said. "I truly do, but we have to be careful what precedent we set." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "You've acted decisively, but bypassing certain protocols, issuing motions independently, it raises governance concerns. Some shareholders, myself included, believe a full external audit is necessary before any leadership transition is finalized." The room went still again. Not a no, not sabotage, but a stall. A delay tactic, cloaked in policy. I looked at him, then the board, and nodded once. "If that's what it takes to move forward with integrity," I said, "then let it happen. I have nothing to hide." But inside, a flame reignited. They still didn't see it. Did they? This wasn't about revenge. This was about rebuilding something that deserved to last. And I wasn't going anywhere. The audit came faster than expected. Within days of Joseph Lang's motion, a third-party firm was contracted. Files were subpoenaed. Devices were imaged. Executives were interviewed. Everything, from contract histories to internal messages, was laid bare. I welcomed it. Let them dig. Let them read everything. I had nothing to hide. But I knew others couldn't say the same. What I didn't expect was just how deep the rot went. It was during the second week of the investigation when I received a confidential report from the auditors. It was marked urgent, internal only, a section highlighted in red. At first, It looked like a routine supplier trail, a string of subcontractors under Gregory Eldridge's name. But then I noticed a buried connection to a nonprofit initiative we'd launched 5 years ago, VLT Impact. On paper, VLT Impact was designed to fund clean energy startups through grants and mentorship. It was a pet project, often used in pitch decks to highlight our corporate social responsibility. But that wasn't what had actually happened. Over $9.3 million had been funneled through the nonprofit into shell corporations, many of which linked back to Gregory's personal investments. Two had addresses matching those of vacation properties. One shared a tax ID with a company previously fined for embezzlement. The charity had been a front, a shield, a siphon. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. This wasn't mismanagement. It wasn't nepotism. It was corruption. And I hadn't seen it. No one had. Because we were too busy fighting symptoms, not digging for the disease. I had a choice to make. Expose the whole system and risk burning it all to the ground. Or protect the company's name, its jobs, its clients, and quietly cut out the infected pieces. It wasn't a clean decision. It wasn't easy, but I didn't come this far to build on a lie. The next morning, I called an emergency board session. No slides, no theatrics, just truth. I have new information from the auditors, I began, and it changes everything. I laid it out, every detail, every dollar, every connection between Gregory and the false nonprofit structure he'd built around himself. There were gasps, outrage, disbelief, and then silence. When I finished, I looked up to see eyes fixed on me, not in judgment, but in shock, respect, readiness. We can pretend we didn't see this, I said, but I won't, because if we want to be the company we say we are, we rebuild from the ground up, starting now. The vote wasn't even close. A motion was passed to launch legal proceedings against Gregory and freeze all assets tied to VLT Impact. Within the hour, the company's legal team made the first filing. But what happened next wasn't expected. That evening, just after 5:15, I received a call from Gregory Eldridge himself. His voice was hoarse, measured, no longer smug. "You found it all, didn't you?" "I did." A pause. "I won't fight this. Aria, I won't drag the company down with me. My attorneys are drawing up my resignation, effective immediately." There was no satisfaction in his tone, no false civility, just resignation in the truest sense of the word. "And one more thing," he added. "The board, they're going to need someone who's already earned their trust." "I'm not interested in power for its own sake," I replied. He chuckled weakly. "Then that's exactly why they'll choose you." The line went dead. The next day, the board convened, no ceremony, no speeches, just one motion on the table. Aria Valamont, Interim Chief Executive Officer of VLT Corporation, approved unanimously. I didn't smile, not right away, because I wasn't stepping into a throne. I was stepping into rubble. But this time, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't afraid to rebuild. My first morning as interim CEO began at 6:45 in the morning with black coffee, no cream, and a list, not of names, of decisions. I wasn't interested in maintaining appearances. I wasn't here to stroke egos or ease anyone back into comfort. The company had spent too long cushioning the wrong people while suffocating those who carried the real weight. That ended now. By 9 o'clock, my first executive memo was live. Subject line: Day 1, we begin again. In it, I outlined 3 priorities: an internal promotion freeze pending departmental audits, voluntary exits for any manager tied to the Clearline transaction, a 90-day plan to reinvest in frontline talent and rebuild client trust from the ground up. It was short, clear, and not up for debate. That afternoon, I met with department heads in the same conference room where Lucas once fumbled through charts he didn't understand. Now the air felt different, focused, watchful. Some welcomed the changes, grateful someone had finally taken the wheel. Others, not so much. "I don't think we need a complete overhaul," said Dennis Lark, a legacy shareholder who'd been quiet during the vote to remove Gregory. "Stability is the priority right now." "Stability doesn't mean staying broken," I said calmly. "It means rebuilding on ground we can trust." He didn't respond. In the following weeks, I moved fast. I reinstated Natalie Ruiz, not just as an advisor, but as chief people officer. She revamped our hiring policies and reinstated exit interviews, which had been quietly suspended under Calvin. I greenlit the reopening of client feedback loops and asked for direct communication with the top 25 accounts. That step alone resulted in 5 major clients renewing contracts, 2 of them increasing investment. But not everyone appreciated the momentum. "You're burning bridges," one manager muttered during a strategy call. "Only the ones built on sand," I replied. I didn't do it to be liked. I did it because it was necessary. The turning point came when we launched the Reclaim VLT campaign, a bold internal branding shift that acknowledged the company's recent failures, honored the people who stayed, and recommitted to transparency. It was risky, but it worked. The staff lounge was buzzing. HR inboxes overflowed with volunteers for pilot teams. Clients started using phrases like "finally" and "real change." Still, I wasn't blind to the quiet resistance. Some employees kept their distance. Some investors grew twitchy. The more traditional among them didn't like reform without ritual. Then came the twist I didn't expect, but welcomed. I was reviewing expansion proposals one evening when Joseph Lang requested a private meeting. He arrived with a briefcase and an air of finality. "I've sold my shares," he said without emotion. "Effective this week." I raised an eyebrow. "To whom?" "A group in Singapore, diversifying their tech portfolio. They liked your tone." I nodded. "I see." "I didn't agree with how fast you moved," he admitted. "Still don't. But maybe that's the point." Then he added, "You won't hear from me again, but for what it's worth, good luck." And just like that, he was gone. I didn't panic. I didn't beg him to stay, because the truth was, his chapter was closed, and mine was just beginning. Not everyone needs to stay in order for a company to rise. Sometimes rebirth means letting go of habits, of people, of power dynamics that no longer serve. I looked out the window of my office that night, the same one Gregory once occupied, and for the first time, the view didn't intimidate me. It inspired me, because we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something better. By the end of the quarter, the silence had changed. It wasn't the strained hush of suspicion or fear. It was the kind of silence people gave to someone they trusted to speak first. The board had approved every major structural reform I proposed. Our largest clients were back, not just signing renewals, but asking what else they could invest in. Employee retention was up, productivity was rising, and even the press, once frothing for scandal, had grown quiet. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. One afternoon, during a routine leadership briefing, someone referred to my policies as the Valamont Standard. I didn't comment. I just made a note on my tablet and kept moving. Legacy wasn't declared. It was earned, quietly, painfully, step by step. But the closer you get to stability, the more the old ghosts rattle their chains. It started with subtle disruptions. A leaked memo to the press that twisted our hiring reform into an accusation of bias. A last-minute budget change that nearly derailed a new client onboarding. A suspicious uptick in vendor billing discrepancies. None of it screamed sabotage, but it smelled like it. I traced the issues back to a handful of middle managers, remnants of the Calvin era, who had stayed quiet during the transition, but were now clearly trying to sandbag the process from within. I called a closed-door meeting. No assistants, no distractions, just four of them, and me. "I'm not here to yell," I said evenly. Standing at the head of the table, "I'm here to make something clear." I placed a stack of reports in front of them, every forged invoice, every back-channel email, every delay tactic. You don't have to agree with how I lead. You don't have to like me. But what you won't do is poison the well we're all drinking from. If you want out, there's the door. If you want to stay, there's the standard. Not one of them said a word, but the next morning, 2 resignations landed on my desk. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mourn. Some exits are necessary for the house to stay standing. But then came the crisis I didn't expect, from someone I thought I'd never question. Natalie, she'd been my anchor, the first to believe in me when no one else did. The one I'd named Chief People Officer without hesitation. So when I received an anonymous tip that she'd used her new authority to redirect training budget funds into a consulting firm she secretly co-owned, I refused to believe it, until I saw the paperwork, until I confronted her, and she didn't deny it. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," she said, voice shaking. "They were supposed to shut you down. I thought if I could just hold a backup plan." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look away. "You were the one person I never doubted," I said. "You don't know what that kind of faith costs." She tried to apologize, but the words fell like loose change on tile. Hollow, clinking, meaningless. "I'm not angry," I told her, finally. "I'm clear." I accepted her resignation the same day. No press release, no smear campaign, just a quiet note to legal and a blank space on the org chart by the week's end. The balance had shifted again. The snakes had shed their skin. The cracks had been resealed, but the lesson stayed. Leadership isn't just about building. It's about protecting what you've built, sometimes from the people who helped you lay the first bricks. So I moved forward, straighter, sharper, still trusting, but never blind. Legacy, after all, isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you defend in real time. And I was far from done defending it. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, steadily, the storm gave way to sunlight. Under my leadership, VLT stopped reacting and started building. Departments once siloed now collaborated openly. Our new client feedback systems produced actionable insights instead of excuses. Promotions were earned, not inherited. People showed up to work not with fear, but with purpose. No more whispers in hallways. No more fire drills hiding executive mistakes. For the first time in years, the company felt alive, real. We weren't chasing headlines, we were chasing impact. On a quiet Monday morning, I stood by the 10th floor window, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch itself awake. My calendar was light. Something that used to make me anxious, now made me grateful. Then came the call. It was unexpected. A representative from Axis One, a direct competitor with global reach and an aggressive expansion strategy. We'd butted heads on client contracts before, but this call wasn't about competition. It was about opportunity. They offered me a buyout. Not just any buyout, a full acquisition of VLT, with me installed as Global Innovation Director under their umbrella. A massive compensation package, unlimited resources, international reach, everything a rising executive might dream of. Except, I wasn't dreaming anymore. I told them I'd need 48 hours to consider. Then I sat with it, hard. I ran the numbers, spoke to legal, took long walks without music. I even reread old memos I'd written during my first week as CEO, searching for clarity in my own words. Could I walk away? Yes. Would it be smart? Maybe. Would it be right? That was the only question that mattered. On the second night, I found myself in the staff lounge at 11:15, alone, lights dimmed, The hum of the vending machine, the only sound. I thought of the people still working late, not because they feared the axe, but because they cared. I thought of every name I'd written in my first restructuring plan, and then I thought of the woman who was fired without warning, and how far she'd come. The answer arrived, not as a burst, but as a quiet knowing. I didn't build VLT to sell it. I rebuilt it to stand, on its own, on my terms. So I declined, gratefully, firmly, without regret. 2 weeks later, I was preparing to present our upcoming social innovation initiative, something that had evolved out of the wreckage of VLT impact. This time, it was real, transparent, audited quarterly. We were going to fund early-stage sustainability tech from overlooked founders. No PR stunts, no vanity metrics. I stood backstage with my talking points when a staffer approached, eyes wide. "There's someone here to see you. He wasn't on the list." I didn't need to ask who. I stepped out into the hallway, and there he was. Gregory Eldridge. Thinner, grayer, but no less composed. "Aria," he said with a nod. "Gregory." He held no briefcase, no entourage, just tired eyes and a hesitant calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I just came to see it, what you've done, what I couldn't." There was no apology, but there was something close, something human. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't need to. Instead, I said, "You built the shell. I built the soul." He nodded, eyes lowering. "And I see it now." He left as quietly as he came, and I walked out onto that stage, not to prove anything, but to share a vision that wasn't rooted in revenge, or control, or survival, but growth, hope, peace, the kind of peace that comes only after war has passed, and something better is finally allowed to bloom in its place. Sometimes, the best kind of power is the quiet kind. Arya didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge for attention. She rebuilt, slowly, smartly, and without apology. This story isn't just about corporate betrayal, it's about resilience, about learning to lead without becoming what hurt you. It's about refusing to be defined by someone else's decision to underestimate you. Too many people are fired unfairly, silenced unfairly, passed over, ignored, replaced, unseen. But when you reclaim your voice, not with noise, but with purpose, everything changes. Arya's legacy wasn't just about titles or ownership. It was about impact, about turning injustice into fuel, about proving that true leadership doesn't scream, it builds. So if you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or shut out, know this: your story isn't over. It might just be getting started. What part of Arya's journey hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about your story, your turning point, or the moment you chose to rise instead of fold. If you know someone who's fighting their own quiet battle, send them this story. You never know who needs it today. And if you want more true-to-life stories like this, raw, real, and redeeming, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we're not just telling stories, we're building something stronger, together.